Since we do have a quorum, I think it would be appropriate to call the meeting to order and assume that all the usual notices about remote meetings and so on have just been read. And as a formality, I suppose I can call the roll of everybody who is present. Stephen Crowley.
Here.
Anne Marie Foley.
Here.
Doreen DeFazio.
Here.
And David Robbins is here. So first item on our agenda is to continue our discussion about the Trails Committee. Doreen was able to dig up some information from Wellesley, was it Wellesley, Northborough, and Natick.
Yep.
And just sort of quickly reading through that, there's some, I think some useful things for us to take into account. Probably the biggest thing that we will be grappling with is the fact that the Trails Committee we're proposing is something that is going to be working cooperatively with both the Land Trust and the Conservation Commission as the two bodies that are responsible for most of the trails. And ultimately our mission here, either tonight or when, as a follow-up tonight, our mission will be to propose a charge for the list of responsibilities for this Trails Committee. So after having reviewed what Doreen sent out, any thoughts, any comments, anything you want to sort of go over to start with, Doreen, since you actually did the work of digging this information up?
Sure. Yeah, I can start. I don't know if it's helpful, and I'm not on my computer, so Dave, maybe if the rest of the group wants, we could even pull it up and screen share it to go through some of the things. I will say that 2 weeks ago, I reached out to the entire Trails Committee in Wellesley because it just so happens that they have an email address for all of them. And then I reached out to one person, the chair in Natick, and the chair, it seemed to be kind of like a standardized email that I think went to the planning director in Northborough. Unfortunately, not one person has gotten back to me for discussion. So what I want to start with in saying is I am happy to continue to reach out. I actually happen to know the planner in Northborough, and I think she's new. She's actually was the planning director in Millbury, and I was surprised to see her name. And it's very possible she just moved over there and, understanding it's town meeting time and everything. But I was also a little disappointed that there was like 10 people in Wellesley and not one person responded. However, they seem to have the most on their website. So that was good. So anyway, just want to sort of be upfront with that unfortunately there was no conversation. It was more just sort of researching on their websites at this point. But I think regardless of whether if it's me, if I'm appointed to this committee post my term on the select board, which will be, days away, or if it's someone else, maybe a new select board member on this committee, that we can just move ahead and maybe continue to see if we can reach out and have a contact person at another community if that's necessary after this discussion tonight. So what I will say is it looks like Wellesley has had a Trails Committee since 1996. And so they had pretty robust information about what their mission is, how they collaborate with other committees in town, and what they look for in terms of cohesiveness throughout the town. And it's based on our discussions previously in this group. I think that seems to coincide with what we're looking to do, because we have the Grafton Land Trust, we have trails. They even talk about not just access for trails, but also for bikes and pedestrians and open space in general. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that that's our overarching vision for the Trails Committee. So it would be wonderful to connect with somebody over there. but also just like I said, I tried to lay out a little bit of helpful information about, and this is cut and paste from their website of what their goals are, what they discuss in meetings, the history of the committee. And they seem to also have some connection to some regional resources as well, which might be important for us to talk about. The interesting thing, and I'm kind of skipping ahead here, but Natick, I looked at all the members in Natick and then compared them, and it just so happened that they all also sit on the Conservation Commission, which I found an interesting
Yeah.
approach. Because then it was like, well, why don't you just put this under conservation and have it be one of their charges? So I don't know, but I pointed that out at the end too, because again, I think what we're talking about is a more robust, inclusive committee that would have perhaps, people from conservation, people from Grafton Land Trust, but also some at-large members and yeah, so more in line with what Wellesley is doing, which is why I put them at the top.
Yep. So hopefully I'm sharing. I can't always tell looking at my screens what you guys are seeing.
We can see it.
You can see it.
Yeah.
Is it readable?
Yes, it is.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's perfectly fine.
Okay, so this is, I mean, there's a lot of, it looks really comprehensive what Wellesley is showing there.
Hey, everybody, it's Elizabeth.
Hi, Elizabeth.
Hello.
Glad you could join us.
Yeah,
So, Elizabeth,
sorry, I'm driving, so I'm going to have to do it just on the phone.
Yep, that's okay. Doreen has just been describing for us what she found from Wellesley and Northborough and Natick on the Trails Committee. Wellesley has this a pretty comprehensive description of the mission and goals of their Trails Committee. And that's probably, I think what we're looking for is what we would like to propose that Grafton create as the Trails Committee, and what the committee's charge, duties, and responsibilities will be. And that's basically what we want to talk about tonight. Is where, how do we get to a place where we're ready to propose the Grafton Trails Committee. I think, to me at least, it looks like looking at what Wellesley spelled out there is a sort of a good starting point.
If I may also add, one of our previous discussions was also around maintenance. Like who's going to be responsible for what, if, because I think that may come up even at the select board level, bringing this charge forward.
Yes.
And, I think the conclusion that we came to is like Grafton Land Trust will manage their trails, conservation will manage their trails. But as we move forward and we find potential land that we want to, encourage to be used as recreation and open space and trails, it says Wellesley coordinates with DPW for assistance to provide trail mowing, removal of large down trees. And I just kind of wanted to throw that out there too, because I know that obviously Wellesley has a larger funding source than Grafton. And so I don't know if that's an option for Grafton's DPW to be responsible. So I think that's
I would think, sorry.
No, go ahead, Elizabeth.
Well, I would think that clearing of the trails, like that's heavy equipment can be. So DPW is the logical partner. But does that fall under trails? Does that fall under open space, conservation? And then I agree. I'm sorry, I can't look at the document, but how many people constitute a trail committee? Is it just for existing trails? When we're forging new trails, like what is the jurisdiction? So I think it's going to get messy if it's like this trail belongs to this person and this trail belongs to that person.
Yeah.
Or that group, not person, but is there like a, kind of a trail? Does it unify all of the trail, conservatives like together? And then how do we leverage other partners? So maybe
Yeah.
they have that in there, but I think DPW seems logical.
Yeah, I think part of at least part of our concept for the Trails Committee is that it would sort of tie together the various, primary land trust and the town-owned conservation land where there's trails. But so this committee would be not sort of yet another committee that's going to take on a lot of the detailed responsibilities. Its role is a little bit more coordination in terms of. In terms of maintenance, construction, clearing trails, maintaining trails on the town-owned trails, I would expect the DPW to be able to have a role in that.
Dorian, thank you for putting the minutes together from the March call, and I called out the need for a partnership with the Grafton Land Trust. They already do this. So I wouldn't suggest we actually recreate the wheel. Let's benefit from what they have learned, how they maintain their fields.
Yeah.
I don't believe there's a lot of heavy equipment, and it is done by volunteers. I wouldn't necessarily want to, and I don't think we have the funding to rely on DPW to do any work unless large equipment is necessary, which unless we're building trails, if we're just maintaining it, what do we need heavy equipment for? Maybe if a large tree is down, but a guy with a chainsaw can cut a tree across a trail within a day. I mean, that's a volunteer opportunity. So I agree with we have to come up with a plan, but not make it so big that it's unachievable.
Right. Absolutely. And it occurs to me to think too that one of the responsibilities of this Trails Committee that we are proposing probably will turn out to be identifying opportunities for extending the trail system. And that kind of ties in with the second agenda item, where we're going to, we wanted to explore further the, some of the land use action items in the open space and recreation plan, particularly the prioritization of land for future acquisition. I think trails has to be a part of that because there is the potential for acquiring land whose value lies in extending the trail network. So the Trails Committee, to an extent, would be sort of a good body. Again, tying this Trails Committee that we're talking about really is it's sort of collaborating very closely with the Land Trust and the Conservation Commission, who are the bodies that are really responsible for the existing trails, for the maintenance and day-to-day operation, if you will, of the existing trails. And so the committee that we're talking about is not intended to duplicate any of that, but rather to more like coordinate and tie things together.
Yeah, I'm thinking that in our town, we're fortunate that we have a lot of this in the works already, right? It's just kind of like somebody that will be overseeing the whole thing and trying to coordinate. We already have great groups doing great things.
And unify all of wouldn't it be great to share best practices across different groups, be able to unify them under one vision.
Yeah, so I think that's kind of our challenge here is to spell out what we want this Trails Committee to do. And I think it's largely around that concept of unifying the existing trail work that's being done and unifying, coordinating, how whatever words you want to use. But I think you're right. That's the concept that we're not proposing yet another body to take over our management of another group of trails.
And even coordinating, I see this in Wellesley. I was just talking to somebody about the Upton parcel that was just, I think, went through their town meeting, the 95 acres that's on our border, even coordinating with other towns, the Westboro with their Emerald Trails system, or whatever that is, and Upton. That might be something that our current conservation and GLT aren't necessarily, looking outside of our town. That might be kind of a fun thing for this committee to do.
Yeah.
Does it say, sorry, did it say anywhere, I did read through this briefly earlier, but who this, in Wellesley, for example, who the Trails Committee directly reports to? Like who are they? Do they fall under their select board there?
I believe they fall under planning, but I will double check that and send an email out because I know, like I stated before, I know Northborough and Natick both fall under the planning department, but I will confirm that after the meeting about Wellesley.
Yeah, what you see on the screen, the Trails Committee is under the Natural Resources Commission.
Oh,
Right, but then, you know, obviously.
And then where does that
Right,
fit in the
right.
overall organization of the town?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
no, I like that too, of coordinating perhaps with neighboring towns as well. I think there's an opportunity there, particularly if we're talking beyond a walking trail system and it turns into a bike system or something that a neighboring town is working on that we can, or I mean, even a walking trail, right? If we have land that's touching, another town's property, that we have opportunity to acquire the land and build a longer trail, that's fantastic. And that, I think in order to do that, this committee would have to, as Anne Marie stated, build a relationship with those communities in their trails committee or the equivalent too.
Yeah, that's a good, valuable thought there, and it reminds me that I actually saw a little bit of that kind of thing. There's a subdivision that's going up off of Adams Road, and it borders on Westboro, and part of that subdivision actually is in Westboro. So obviously, our board handled the Grafton part of it, and Westboro handled their part of it. But part of that was integrating with a trail system. The Sudbury Valley trustees were involved in that, and part of that, the open space portion of that subdivision is basically is planned to coordinate, integrate with some existing Westboro trails.
Wow.
So we did.
So I think we have to also, and I love the idea of kind of connecting with our neighbors, and I love the All Trails map and apps that we really access. I guess the question is, what would this committee, are they responsible for the marketing, for the acquisition of new trails, for the development of those trails, for the stewardship of and the maintenance of the trails existing? Like, if you start to break down what are the key job descriptions of the committee, I think marketing could be one of them, or stewardship, or whatever you want to call it. But is that part of our role, is to establish what that looks like?
Well, we would probably help to come up with the charge. And if you wanted something like that in the charge, which I didn't think about marketing, but I have been talking about, looking at Grafton as in terms of tourism, when we're looking at economic development as part of my campaign. And this could potentially be something, right? That we have these great trails and maybe we tie them into another town and we collaborate with them and we can get folks coming in here and then they stop at the country store and they buy something, right?
Yeah, I don't have it right in front of me, but I seem to recall that amongst the trail related action items in the plan is some sort of coordinated trail mapping and promotion of trails. And if it's not there, it should be, because that's I think that again there's the opportunity for the Trails Committee that we're talking about, bringing together the various different organizations that are operating or managing trails in town, and kind of getting that coordinated, and that probably tying that back into the subdivision I was just talking about. It appears that there are going to be some trails there that are neither Grafton Land Trust nor Grafton Conservation Commission, not town owned at all, but they're going to be run and managed by the Sudbury Valley trustees. So there's another organization that this committee would be coordinating with and collaborating with. In fact, I'd extend that concept to say that the role of this committee would be, at least in part, to collaborate with anybody who is involved in managing trails in Grafton. And I mean, it could even be some private property owners that manage their own trails, but there's potential for some coordination there as well. So that seems to be kind of a theme that we're heading toward, is that this committee is looking at collaborating with basically anybody who manages trails in Grafton and trying to sort of bring that all together.
I have a question for this group too. How do I put this? So, as we all know, as we start to, well, Dave, you probably know best, being on planning board, but like as we start looking at land in general in Grafton, right? And there's opportunity, I will say, to keep it as open space, use it as a trail, recreation area. We're also looking at housing and development, and including economic development, depending on the zoning, right? And so what I also envision too is this committee kind of having a seat at the table early on, maybe under planning, where if land becomes available, that there's even an opportunity for negotiation of, like, let's say this land has been decided to be used for commercial development. And we say, okay, great, but we want a portion of it to have a trail that runs through, because we're trying to make a cohesive trail in the town. And, that was recently done on Pleasant Street, when the piece of land on Pleasant Street, neighbors came forth and said, we don't want this developed. And even though the land eventually is going to a developer, the developer understands that, like, oh, well, there's a lot of conservation land back here. So we're going to, put trailheads, keep this land available, and only build on this section. And that's, sort of the negotiation, for lack of a better word. So, as things move forward, that's the vision that I have too. And I don't know if that's exactly how it works, Dave, or how it's worked in the past, but what do you all see in terms of when land becomes available? I guess is a better question. Like, how is the Trails Committee involved, if at all?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, and I think it's a good point to raise. On the board, I've seen a few projects come through the board where there has been an interest in trails. There's another one I can think of. There's a solar project just down the road from me, where the topic didn't come up as early in the discussion as I, in hindsight, realized it perhaps should have. And that's where a Trails Committee could help, was there, in the early stages of discussion of a project, in any area where there is a potential for trails. Either the project may in fact be impacting existing trails, or there may be an opportunity to include trails in a project. So I think it would be helpful if the planning board and for the projects that we review, and the zoning board for the comprehensive permits that they review, to include consideration of trails fairly early on in the discussions, so that we can identify existing trails that we might want to preserve, and B, we can identify opportunities for integrating trails into the open space on these projects. Because ideally, any project of any real size should include some space that's set aside as open space, whether it's for trails or for some other purpose. So having one body, a Trails Committee here, that we can rely on to give us advice on trails when projects are being reviewed and planned, I think that would be very helpful.
Well, Dave, that speaks to representation on the Trails Committee. If we have representation from the various conservation planning, they're going to know about those opportunities, and it becomes more of a checklist. This opportunity has now come up. Well, our trails considered. Just, have we coordinated with the other groups? That's certainly the Trails Committee I would say their responsibility is make sure that coordination is in place.
Yep.
Which also begs the question, should this go under the planning board instead of the select board? Because the planning board will hear about availability of land before the select board, generally speaking.
Is that what Wellesley was doing?
Well, that is, we're about 90% sure. We don't,
Yeah.
but the other two, yes, the other two are under planning.
I would agree with it, that the select board have enough responsibilities. They don't need also to manage the trails. Even
Yeah, and
they would actually have a say and an interest in what is best for the town from a trails and recreation standpoint.
Yeah, I don't know that a trails committee necessarily has to be, in some sense, under another board. And it could be appointed by the select board as sort of a committee kind of on a par with most other committees. And the important concept is that the trails committee is connected into the various other boards. For instance, when the planning board reviews a project, the planning board should be soliciting input from the trails committee as to what are there trails opportunities potentially in this project, or like I said before, does this project potentially interfere with existing trails? And what kind of impact it might have on existing trails? Where could trails be beneficially added? So that doesn't require the trails committee to be subservient in any sense to the planning board. It simply requires that, as the planning board does with many other committees, we solicit input from all sorts of other committees on any project review. So we would, this would add one more. Let's not forget trails when we're looking at a project.
Right.
I agree with Dave on this. And I remember when I started up that Fields Coalition a long time ago, and we just were a standalone body, and we were similar to this, but we're looking for fields in particular. And I think that you're right, that probably makes the most sense, that they would just be a standalone body. And the last thing planning needs is more things to oversee as well, right?
Yeah.
But to your point, you would have that in the back of your head that, oh yeah, let's make sure we have somebody, we have trails come in here to take a peek at this as well.
Yeah, I'm reminded that.
But I mean, I guess.
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, just like if they're not a governing body, or like what is their authority if they're a standalone commission?
Well, it would be equal to any other committee that is currently in operation.
Yeah, it
They
just
still have
Disability
to report
Commission.
into someone.
Yeah.
But in terms
But
of
still
like
reporting to
reporting
somebody,
in, or
Elizabeth said.
sorry, can you say that again?
Elizabeth was saying, we're having a tough time hearing you, Elizabeth. They would still report to somebody. What organization would they report to?
Ultimately, they would probably, have to submit a report to select board or some sort of a reporting mechanism. They're not just going to be out on their own altogether. But in terms of, there's a lot of committees in the town. I don't know how many do you guys think, right? 20 or 30?
Yeah,
a lot that just stand alone. I'm just thinking like disabilities committee comes into my mind, but there's an awful lot of other ones.
Yeah, I mean, committees, by and large, most committees don't report to other committees or boards in any sense. The select board appoints the members of committees. Basically the membership of a committee is typically, it's spelled out in the charge of the committee, which is one of the things that we'll be wanting to put together at some point. But basically, it's either members appointed by the select board. Some committees members are appointed by the town administrator. Others are representatives of other committees. That varies. But the appointing authority is the committee doesn't report to them in any normally in any other sense. The committee it's the committee, and it does its work, and it works with other committees quite often as part of its job.
So, I mean, given that we seem to be in agreement about this committee and at least in small part of what the work would entail, where do we go from here, Dave? We start to work on a charge? Is that our purview?
Right. I think it sounds like we've got a pretty good sense of what we want this committee to do. And so really our next step is going to be to, to propose a charge, basically who's on the committee and what their responsibilities are. Yeah. And so basically it takes somebody to take what we've talked about here and try to write it up. And if nobody else wants to do it, I can try. And I sort of put together the charge for the committee that we're all now on.
If you could, well, if you want to, that's fabulous. If you can wait a week, I'm happy to tackle it, but I can't.
Yeah, I'd be happy to wait a week and we'll see how things go. And yeah, this is not something that we need to get done yesterday. We have a certain amount of time to let this all, to work it out. And given the probable changes in one way or another, the changes in membership of this committee, yeah, if we want to wait till our next meeting and we can sort of, we can all think about it and jot down any ideas we may have. But yeah, we can, we can sort of regroup at our next meeting once we know who our members are going to be, and take it from there.
Dave, can you send a copy of what you're displaying on the screen right here?
I think we got it today.
Did they?
Doreen emailed it out this afternoon.
All right, I'll take a look.
So once that the charter is established, is it then our job to recruit members for the trail committee?
No, it would be posted on most likely the town website. The select board would discuss it obviously in one of their meetings, and word would get out that this is being formed, and then people would apply to the position via the website, and then it would be up to the select board to appoint those folks. What we can do is delineate, as you guys said, or Dave or whoever, that maybe we want to make sure one member is from planning, one member is from Concom, somebody is from GLT. That would be part of the charge, is that we want it to be a 7-member board, a 9-member board, 5, whatever it is, and determine how many at-large members we want as well. Recreation probably might be something that we might want represented, but we'll see.
Yeah, and for however many at-large members we end up with, then each of us as individuals, if we know somebody that we'd like to see on the committee, we can certainly recruit them. Mm-hmm. But yes, as Anne-Marie pointed out, that the normal procedure is, once the committee has been adopted, the charge has been adopted by the select board, the vacancies are advertised. If for example conservation is to have a representative, conservation will be notified that they are expected to appoint a representative to this committee, and that's sort of that's how it'll go.
Yeah, and I like that. Yeah,
typically
I like the diversity.
Yeah.
Yep.
Would we include in the charge? Do you include the terms, like how long we want a term for these people to be, or is that just?
That's usually included in the charge. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So maybe folks can think about who, other than, we've kind of listed out a few, like we might to be represented on this committee. You could email that to me. Can we do that? Like email outside a meeting? Okay.
As long as we don't respond to it, we could all email you. Just in terms of open meeting law, we just can't have a dialogue, but I think that's a good idea. And I'm sure it sounds like we're all pretty much on the same page too, in terms of representatives. It's really just a matter of, do we want a 7-person committee or a 9-person committee? And that's, typically the discussion is how many people, in my opinion, in something like a trail commission, more is better, because we're going to be looking for volunteers. So I would go for like a 9-member board and have a couple at-large members, and then representatives from planning, probably select board, conservation, Grafton Land Trust, recreation.
What do you think, Steve? You think recreation would want to be included in that, or do you guys?
Yeah, yes. I mean, and that's I hesitate with select board, because I feel like select board will have, I guess, opportunity for communication of what's going on in recreation through the town administrator. So one or the other would be great.
Yeah, I think probably the the most
Recreation.
important representation on this Trails Committee would be the Land Trust and Conservation.
Yeah.
What are you going to say, Steve, about the
I would say
recreation?
a recreation should have a role.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
I just
Recreation
wasn't
does, I know we have responsibility for some trails within the rec department, as well as the software that Jen currently is managing has trail mapping in it. And it's not all trails, but it's another software where she's maintaining trail views.
Yeah, that sounds like it very much ties in with this Trails Committee.
It does. I was just thinking out of the box is when we do advertise the positions, how about the at-large positions, have somebody from North Grafton, South Grafton, West Grafton, East Grafton, Center Grafton. I mean, just representation that covers the entire town.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. So at-large members by precinct.
Each,
Sure. Precinct, that's a great way to divide it up.
I like that.
think the only committee in town where that sort of thing is done is at this point is the Finance Committee, where they do in fact have a requirement to have one Finance Committee member from each of the precincts.
I like that though. I think it's great for a committee like this because you know your own area.
Yeah.
Gives everybody a voice. I know all the trails I have access to in South Grafton.
Yep. I love that.
Me too.
And also, I'm sure people on the committee too, tend to, like, for example, where I live, I often walk the trails closest to my home, just based out of convenience, right? It's not that, so let's say, for example, if I was an at-large member of the committee, it's kind of like, well, I'll know if something's going on, or I'll know the people to contact in that area. So I think that's a great idea, Steve.
So just FYI, if we were looking at a 9-person committee with Concom, Planning, GLT, and Recreation, and those 4 people, we're at 8. So it'd be one more potential committee member from a town board that we thought might be, just in your thinking for this. All we need is one thing now to email me.
Anne Marie, can you say those again? Which ones?
Concom, Planning, GLT, and Recreation. I didn't include Select Board because we kind of said Recreation potentially. So if we just did those 4 plus the 4 other members, there would be one more, which could be Select Board or it could be.
Well, if we're talking precincts, we have 5 precincts in town.
Oh, is there 5?
Yeah.
Okay, then that's that.
We almost have enough people to have 6 precincts.
Whoa.
I think if the population had grown just a little bit more, we would end up with 6 precincts now.
Okay, so I stand corrected. So it's 5 and 4. So either we go up 2 or we call it a day.
Yep. Although I might suggest that I'm not sure that it would be essential to have a planning board member on this committee. There would be certainly, there would be, in any case, we would expect there to be communication between the Trails Committee and planning, but I don't know that, and maybe it does make sense. I'm just not quite sure that a planning board member would need to be a part of this committee.
All right, well, we can all think about that. So now that we know this,
yeah, give that some thought.
Just 4 more.
9, yeah. That's like a good number, the 9. And that includes the planning board, right?
Well,
Yeah.
I think we can think about, so we're convinced, we're solid on Recreation, GLT, and Concom, and maybe we want to think about who the 4th is, and or if we wanted to go up 2 and have 2 others. So maybe that's what we can think about over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, we don't need to decide that right now.
Right.
It just, that's a thought. And so it sounds like we're well on the road to getting this accomplished, and at some point we'll need to figure out when our next meeting is, and our regular meeting schedule would have our next regular meeting next week, but that's probably it's probably less than ideal. For one thing, it only gives us a week between now and then to get anything done, and for another thing, it may be sometime after that before the committee membership is sort of stabilized again. Depending on the outcome of the election. For the sake of argument, let's assume that Anne Marie does get on the select board. Then an at-large seat will open up, or Yeah, actually, Anne Marie could retain the at-large seat, and the select board could appoint someone else. Although that would look a little funky to have two select board members on the committee. And in any case, Doreen will not be a select board representative anymore. Conceivably, Doreen could take an at-large seat that's vacated by Anne Marie, or things could play out differently. We don't know. So our regular meeting schedule, third Wednesday of the month, would put our next meeting in the, what does my calendar claim that the third Wednesday of June is? June 1/8/50. That would put it on June 15th. So at least, that's about 5 weeks away, 5 or 6 weeks away, which would give plenty of time, hopefully, to get the committee membership reestablished after the election, and give time for all of us to think about this Trails Committee and come back prepared to start nailing down a proposed charge.
I like that idea. We can come up with a, Dave, you want to gather? I'd like to take a shot at what you're putting some thoughts together as far as what that might look like.
You want to take a shot at the charge? Is that what you're saying?
I could do that, Dave.
Hey.
I already volunteered, but go at it.
I won't object.
I'm not one to recreate the wheel, and Wellesley has a very good one, and it's a matter of changing some wording around to make sure we're including the committees that need to be represented and who we're working with closely. That needs to be included in the charge, and I'm happy to take the shot at drafting one.
I'd be happy to have you do that. And I'm certainly not one to insist that I do all the work. My goodness, I do enough work as it is.
And I'd happily take on the work, but I don't know what the future will bring. So
yeah,
I will say the select board does their reappointments in June, and I don't know what the date is right now. So, again, hoping things play out where Anne Marie is able to be the select board representative at your next meeting. You likely will not have an at-large member by the June 15th meeting, unless there's a reappointment process before that. And I don't know. I'm not sure of the date.
Yeah, we'll see how that plays out.
Yeah. But I can certainly also email you all as a resident of the town of Grafton with ideas. So you may get an email from my personal account just checking in, and
I'm not one to refuse to accept good ideas no matter where they come from, or even ideas in general, whether they turn out to be good or bad. Sometimes you don't know until you read through it and see.
Yep.
Well, the thought that counts.
Yeah.
And not to clutter the conversation, but I have a conflict on June 15th. I have a gala that I'm hosting, so for work. So I'm sorry, but I can't do that date. So if it impacts when the select board reappoints, maybe we have some flexibility in the timing.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, that we can consider June 15th as a tentative date, but as that date approaches, we may have various good reasons for choosing a different date. Like, we kind of ended up here on an odd day. We normally been meeting on Wednesdays. This is the Thursday, but that's what it took to get us all together, before Doreen ceases to be the select board representative, because Doreen had done a lot of work for us, and it was important to me to have a meeting where Doreen could contribute what she's done. So yeah, we'll be flexible on the next meeting. Anne Marie?
Sorry, Dave, I don't know. I don't have the agenda in front of me, but do we need to make a motion to approve the 2 sets of minutes?
Yes, that's the last item on the agenda.
Okay, sorry. If you don't mind, I want to hop on another meeting at 7:45.
It happens to be just 7:45 now. So yes.
You have a quorum without me?
Actually, we do have a quorum without you.
Okay, sorry about that.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Anne Marie.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Stay on, Elizabeth.
Yep.
I do. The minutes look fine to me, by the way, for what it's worth.
So if you have a couple of minutes, why don't we take that out of order? We've got three
Okay.
sets of minutes. Doreen had sent out the minutes of our March 16th meeting. She may email those out the night of right after the meeting. And then we've got two others from,
I think one back in November and then one in,
I'm going to go, sorry.
no
All
worries.
right. Thank you.
I am.
all right. So we'll stick to our agenda as written. I think we've got our marching orders for the Trails Committee. And whenever we do get together, I'll communicate with all you guys about setting a firm meeting date once we know more. The second agenda item we had was the open space and recreation plan land use action items, which was sort of mostly centered around prioritizing potential future land acquisitions. We've discussed this at the last couple of meetings, and sort of the first thought I wanted to lead off with was a notion that while we've discussed ultimately the need for the town to consider all potential land uses, including things that are not within the purview of open space and recreation, I think this committee's interest should be focused on prioritizing open space and recreation uses. In other words, for any given parcel of land, or for all the potential future acquisitions, we can, and we talked about the Trails Committee identifying trails opportunities for future land acquisitions. There are potentially recreation opportunities and potentially other open space, ranging from just open space in general to specific conservation needs. So what we probably want to be thinking about is a committee, or whether, I think we were sort of thinking maybe this committee would take on that role rather than forming a whole brand new committee, but that the role here would be to look at, identifying important future needs for recreation, for open space, for trails, except I think I would rely on the Trails Committee for that aspect of it. And for us to, sort of to look to identify, here's where we see priorities for open space and recreation land acquisition and use. And, and recognizing that the priorities may in some case be competing with other priorities, but that's not up to us. I mean, me with my planning board hat on, yeah, that's I have to take a larger view, but from the point of view of this committee, we're focused on open space and recreation, and what do we need for open space? What do we need for recreation? Because one of the things should be to identify, here's some places in town maybe that we need some more recreation land. But I'm sort of generalizing here, but really to focus on open space and on recreation, and identify priorities for land acquisition for those specific purposes. And those priorities will ultimately be balanced in with other priorities where there are competing priorities. But that would help us really, I think, focus more on what's most valuable for us to acquire as open space and recreation.
So Dave, just in the sense of me taking minutes here, I just want to make sure that I'm understanding this correctly. So you're saying that aside from the Trails Committee, who would represent trails, that this committee could potentially be looking at land acquisitions and prioritizing or advocating for either open space needs or recreation needs. Like, for example, there are areas or neighborhoods in town that, may not have a park within, a mile, 2-mile range from them, where other places might have a few of those. And so just kind of identifying maybe what the needs are based on the conversations that happen in this committee or from a planning level? Meaning like a master plan level, or maybe it's both.
Yeah, to some extent, if we are able to identify, here's an area of town that needs more recreation land. Here's an area of town that needs a park. Here's an area of town that needs, and again, I'll pull trails into this because trails is very much a part of open space and recreation. But what we're proposing is a trails committee to sort of focus specifically on trails. And that would be combined with, what we might look at is focus on other recreation. The trails is sort of recreation, sort of open space. But what other, where could we use more recreation? Where could we use, and from a conservation perspective, where do we have natural resources that are important to protect by preserving them as open space? Conservation would have some input into that aspect. Recreation would have some thoughts about where we have recreation needs, and sort of the open space as a term is kind of a little bit nebulous because it encompasses a lot of things. But we may identify, and I don't know off the top of my head, I don't know, but we may identify, other open space values or other open space uses that are not recreation, they're not trails, they're not natural resource protection, but there's some other open space value, kind of open space in its own right has some value. And so I think we would want to be looking for, sort of taking a look at all that, identifying some of these priorities, and ultimately at least some of that would feed into the master plan. And so I think the master plan would be expecting to, either as part of the plan itself or as a follow-up action, I think it would be expecting to sort of see a continuous process of evaluating our needs for open space and applying those values, prioritizing the needs. I mean, you could probably imagine certain open spaces a higher priority than other open space, or certain recreation pieces might be a higher priority than others. So we kind of need to be able to prioritize that, because ultimately, as land becomes available for the town to acquire, the town probably doesn't have resources to acquire everything we would like. So we need to be able to prioritize that as well.
Right.
And so, and I think this committee, as the Open Space and Recreation Committee, is probably best positioned to focus on those particular values for land.
And David, the importance of having other committees represented, you speak of the playgrounds and whatnot that we may be lacking in certain areas of the town. That's what recreation is responsible for.
Yes.
That's what we do. That's what we look at. Where are the parks underrepresented? So it's not, I wouldn't suggest that this committee essentially owns that, but they actually take the recommendations and suggestions from recreation, who's already looking at that.
That's why this committee, with a representative from recreation, is probably a good place to bring that together. But absolutely, I would rely on you, Stephen, and your commission to put the meat into that and identify the actual needs.
Do we have someone from representing conservation and Grafton Land Trust yet on this committee?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I think Shannon is, if I remember, Shannon is the GLT representative. She wasn't able to make the meeting tonight, but she is, and Alicia is a representative from conservation. We've yet to have a meeting where Alicia has been able to make it.
Okay.
But representation from conservation would be key, I think, to doing it. And another thing that flitted across my mind a few days ago, remembering what the work I did to compile the open space inventory for the open space and recreation plan, there are several parcels of land in town that were intended to be set aside for either conservation or recreation purposes, but never put under control of either the town or the land trust. So there is, for example, there's two parcels of land off right on Fitzpatrick Road, or just off. I think it's like they touch Fitzpatrick Road. Back when in the late '80s, the and into the '90s, I guess, the Art Lot Acres development over there in Danielle Drive and Alana Drive in that area, those parcels were designated as green space, but they were never turned over to the town. They remained privately owned. There's a lot in that development also was designated as a tot lot, intended as a playground for little kids. That never happened. There's another parcel of land off of Rose Lane that was designated, and this goes back to the 50s, I think, was on the plan, it was designated as a playground, but again, it was never turned over to the town, never used for that. So one of the things that we as a committee could look at, it's kind of along the lines of land acquisition, but it's looking at existing land that has been basically set aside as open space or recreation space, but never put under control of the town to be used in that fashion. So we can think about.
So who has the control of the land right now then?
By and large, it's the the developer of the land. That one off of Rose Lane is still under the name of a company that it still exists, as far as I know. But
okay,
so to consider, and the first question is it worth it for the town to go through whatever it would take to acquire title to those parcels of land? Could we do something useful with them, or do we just is it good enough just to leave them as is? There is some privately owned. These are examples of privately owned, unprotected open space, and part of what we could look at is, do we think that this space ought to come under some form of protection, whether it's ownership by the town or a conservation restriction, or some other sort of easement. There's various ways of putting it under control of the town, but these are parcels that can be considered along with parcels yet to be offered to the town.
Is there like a total inventory list of all of these potential parcels, or no?
great question.
Yes, the open space and recreation plan has an inventory. It's an inventory of all open space, and it does include these parcels.
Can this committee get a copy of that?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not going to make a difference to me if I don't get appointed back on this committee, but I think it would be helpful for everybody to maybe dive into that a bit.
It's part of one chapter of the plan, of the open space and recreation plan, which is up on the town's website.
Oh, great.
Okay, thank you.
But if we wanted to, I mean, it's right there for anybody to download that document and read through it.
Great. I didn't know that existed.
Yep. So.
Doreen, we'll be all out on those trails every day now. We'll know
I know.
every one of them.
Yeah. So I don't know if we need to take this particular conversation any farther right at this point, but I think that that's something. I mean, we may want to try to sort of refine the idea of how we want to follow up on reviewing and prioritizing land for the purposes that we've talked about. Maybe we may want to sort of formalize that a little bit in some senses, possibly even adding that to the committee charge. But because these action items were sort of left undefined, we simply referred to it in the in our list of roles and responsibilities. We referred to it as new committee without trying to identify, because at least when we started on this, we didn't know whether we thought we as a committee should undertake these tasks or if we should create yet another committee to do that. But I think if we're all comfortable, and it's probably best to sort of circulate this idea to the rest of our committee here, but I think if we're comfortable thinking that this committee is really the right place for these particular action items to be carried out, then we could sort of adopt this as, okay, we will add this to our list of what we do.
Sounds good.
In the absence of anybody else taking responsibility for it, why not?
Yep. And so the plan that we're all trying to see implemented, but said, this work should be done, but the plan never said who's supposed to do it. So that's become our job, is to decide who's supposed to do it. And when I first proposed this committee to the select board, I kind of had at the back of my mind that this committee might decide to take responsibility itself for some of the action items.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Particularly because of the feedback we got from, conservation, recreation, for example, that would be a heavy lift for them to take on everything. So, I do think there's some responsibility of this committee to, where we can take some of those responsibilities off their plate and certainly get input, but not have them solely responsible for that action item.
Right. And our job as our first job as a committee was to decide who's responsible for what. And we haven't found another committee that is well positioned to take this, this land use prioritization for open space and recreation. We haven't found anybody else that really looks suitable to take it on. So I think we are probably the right place to do that. Which is kind of where I thought we'd end up when we started.
We wouldn't we're told otherwise.
But yeah, I think it fulfills our responsibility. I mean, part of our charge was to assign responsibility for all these action items, and no one says we can't assign responsibility to ourselves for something.
Mm-hmm. I will also say, just in case this is my last meeting on this committee for some reason, I also would love this committee to advocate as the town works through the master plan too. I think there's going to be, representation from many different, that's the goal, right, of the master plan, is to have as many engaged stakeholders as possible to build out a 30-year plan. And I'm really excited that this committee was formed, and I'd like us to have a seat at the table in that discussion. And I know, Dave, it's wonderful that you will be that person as well. But I think, in terms of like figuring out our charge and jurisdiction to certain areas, and that, we will have a voice in where open space and recreation fits into this town. And I think the timing couldn't be better.
Yeah.
Because as we have an affordable housing trust, we have, even businesses who will have, they're important stakeholders, but so is this, and it's sort of like this representation of Grafton Land Trust and conservation and recreation all wrapped into one committee. And I think that's, there's some power in that. So
I'm expecting, as we work through the master plan, I'm expecting us to make sure that we include all stakeholders in all topics as best we can. I don't want to leave anybody out. Sometimes it's going to be hard to reach out to some groups of people, but as far as town boards and committees, I think pretty much everybody needs to have a voice.
Yep. But if we didn't exist, we wouldn't have had a voice. So thank you for bringing this forward to the select board. And thank you for everybody who's volunteering their time to do this, because I think it's even bigger than we can see right now, because we're potentially going to be part of this 30-year plan.
Yep.
Well said. Well said.
The whole town is going to be, if this master plan is to be useful at all, it needs to cover the whole town. It needs to cover, really represent everybody's interest, all the stakeholders. And ultimately, if the plan proposes some particular actions, it should be something that pretty much we all buy into and agree with. Mm-hmm. So we'll see how all that plays out. But we as an open space and recreation committee are certainly positioned to take on this role of really advocating for those specific areas of interest. So we'll sort of follow up on this, but trying to nail down a little bit more what we'll do, how we'll approach this, these land use prioritization activities. We probably have a pretty good sense now where we want to go with it. So with that, unless there's something else on that topic, the last agenda item is to review the meeting minutes and approve them. So the only thing that I saw in reading through the minutes that I believe needs correction is Shannon's last name is spelled P-H-E-L-A-N, not R.
E-H.
P-H-E-L-A-N. So it's only the last letter that needs
Okay.
to be changed.
Um,
And if that's the worst thing anybody can find wrong with these minutes,
wow.
I sometimes find nits like that, and then then completely miss the glaring errors. But I don't think that's the case here.
Well, I also just want to bring up, you all might want to assign a new clerk at your next meeting too. So you might want to put that on the agenda, Dave, because
Yes, I think I hadn't written that down anywhere, but I hadn't written that down anywhere, but the thought did cross my mind. If you're no longer a member of the committee, it might be difficult for you to serve as clerk. Not impossible. I suppose, we could designate as clerk someone who's not a member of the committee, maybe.
Exactly. I could just listen in on your discussions and still take notes, but
But that's not normally done.
no. And again, if I decide to put my hat in the ring to come back on this committee and the select board decides to appoint me, then I would happy to continue my responsibilities as clerk, but just sort of knowing that you'll have at least one meeting, if not more, without me on the committee, then that would be important to do.
Yep.
So I will make that change to Shannon's last name. And otherwise, Dave, do you want a motion for each one, or do you want a motion for all three together?
A motion covering all three in a single motion works just fine.
Okay. And could you remind me of the dates? I think it's 11.
I've got November 17th, 2021.
Yeah.
February 16th, 2022. And
March 15th, 22.
March 15th, right?
15th, correct.
Yep.
um,
All right. So I make a motion that we approve the meeting minutes for open space and recreation from November 17th, 2021, February 16th, 2022, and March 15th, 2022, as presented with the one amendment of fixing Shannon's last name.
actually, I think the date was March 16th.
It's March
Okay.
15th.
So
Well, the minutes say the 15th. Was
sorry.
Was the meeting the 16th?
Well, my calendar says the meeting was on the 16th.
Interesting. Okay. So, and I will also amend the date of March 16th instead of 15th.
All right. Is there a second to the motion?
Second, Stephen Crowley seconds that.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion of the motion? Hearing none, we'll vote by roll call. Stephen Crowley,
Approved?
Doreen DeFazio,
DeFazio, aye.
Elizabeth Coveney,
Aye.
and Dave Robbins votes aye. Declare the motion carried unanimously. Thank you very much. And Doreen will send the corrected minutes into the town clerk.
I will. And also I will send a copy of the meeting minutes from tonight to this committee to approve at your next meeting.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank
Sure
you.
thing.
And there being no other business, a motion to adjourn might be in order.
So moved.
Did I see Stephen's lips move to second it?
Second.
I second that. Yeah.
Moved and seconded that would be adjourned. Motion is not debatable. Stephen,
Yes.
Doreen,
Aye.
Elizabeth,
Aye.
And Dave votes aye. Motion carried unanimously. We are adjourned for tonight. Thank you very much.